Alright, so let's see. I'm going to talk about MVC framework. So you're going to hear about MVC framework quite a bit. This is another thing that distinguishes an amateur from a real enterprise level developer. So a lot of the amateur programmers, they would start from the top and then just write lines of code. Okay. Before I introduce MVC framework, let me also talk about object-oriented programming. So that, again, that's what amateurs do. They just write from the top to bottom in that order. Now the problem is when you have a long, like a very complex application, you keep writing and writing, writing, and you have like, for example, one page, for example, like Facebook posting a comment page, you have like thousands and thousands of lines of code, and it's very confusing what you need. Like if you want to go make one change, you got to go through all the thousands of code to be able to make a change. It's very frustrating, right? Okay, so before I talk about MVC framework, or you know what, let me just, okay, let's talk about object-oriented programming a little bit. So object-oriented programming would basically group some of the similar functions into what's called an object. So for example, let's say for Facebook, I have a user object, and anything that has to do with the user, I put that in the user object, and there is user file, a file called user.php, whatever, that handles all of the functions related to user. So what does a user need to do? I want to, for example, update my name, update password, upload picture, reset password. All that is grouped in that one file, and it has multiple functions within that user class that handles anything related to user. And you may have, for example, one thing that handles everything about email. So anything related to email is done through this object called email. Okay, that's object-oriented programming. And what that would allow you to do is it makes the code a lot simpler. So instead of having thousands of lines of code, maybe it gets down to a few hundred, because some of the codes are repeating. So when you have object-oriented programming, you can just say, okay, just call that function, and makes it easier to read, easier to maintain, and also makes the code shorter. So shorter the code is always is better. So MVC framework is a new kind of relatively new idea. It's an extension of object-oriented programming. It is basically object-oriented programming. But what that allows you to do is like model. MVC stands for Model View Controller. So models are things that retrieves information from the database and also processes information from the website to the database. Okay, so that's what model is. View is HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Basically anything that the user sees, that's a view. Controller just controls information between the models and the view. And again, as you take some of the training, this will make a lot more sense. So the benefits. The benefit is if you have multiple developers working on the code, the original method, thousands of lines of code from top to bottom doesn't scale, right? But if you use MVC framework, for example, you can have the designer who doesn't understand anything about the coding to go to the view file and just make the website look different, right? And it will still work beautifully because all the backend is done in the models and the controller. Okay, so you can have front-end engineer working on their own thing, and you can have the back-end engineer working on their own thing. Because we broke it down into different buckets, if you need someone to work on the user-related functions, they can just work on the user controller. If someone needs to work on the email stuff, they can just go to the email controller. So that allows people to multiple people to work in the application. But also MVC framework comes with a lot of MVC frameworks such as CodeIgniter or Ruby on Rails or Django, Python Django. They come with a lot of different libraries that are very, very helpful, and also makes your website way more secure because it would automatically prevent it from some of the SQL injection or some of the security vulnerabilities. Okay, so again, every enterprise level web engineer that I know knows how to use a framework. If you don't know how to use a framework, then you're an amateur. Okay, so we use framework, and it makes it easier for you to scale the application as well, and also allows multiple developers to work on it as well. And if you do it this way, the codes are very clean, it's beautiful, it's easy to scale. You can add a lot more developers, and you will just be fine. Okay. All right. So that's the benefit of using an MVC framework. Okay.